He only stopped at the cafe for coffee, until he heard a little girl singing, and something in her voice shattered everything he thought he knew about his past. Rain streaked the windows of the small cafe as Adam Walsh stepped inside, shaking off the cold air that clung to his tailored gray coat. The place was unremarkable at first glance: wooden tables, the soft hiss of an old espresso machine, and a few tired-looking customers hunched over mugs of coffee. For a man who usually dined in private lounges or boardrooms with million-dollar views, it was a strange detour. He hadn't meant to stop, but the rain had started suddenly, and something about the warm glow inside had pulled him in. He ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu, barely noticing the barista's awkward smile as she recognized him. Adam was used to being seen, even when he didn't want to be. He was just about to step away when the sound of a voice stopped him in his tracks. A girl was singing, not loudly, not theatrically, but with a kind of fragile clarity that cut through the murmur of the room. Her voice didn't belong in that place. It was too pure, too raw. He turned and saw her near the corner window, a young girl, maybe 8 years old, standing on a small crate to reach the microphone set up on a low stage. She had long dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and striking blue eyes that didn't match the dullness of her surroundings. Her white sneakers were scuffed, and her coat looked too thin for the weather, but she stood there with remarkable stillness, pouring her heart into every line of the song. No one else in the cafe seemed to be paying much attention. A few customers clapped politely when she finished, and someone tossed a couple of coins into the paper cup in front of her. The girl gave a shy nod, her eyes scanning the room with quiet hope, though she didn't approach anyone. Adam felt a strange knot tighten in his chest. He didn't know why, but something about her presence unsettled him. Maybe it was the way she reminded him of a time he had long buried, or maybe it was just the unbearable idea of a child performing for spare change on a rainy night. He stood still for another moment, then walked toward her. She didn't flinch when he approached, only looked up at him with a calmness beyond her years. He crouched slightly to meet her eyes and asked, "Why are you singing here?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm trying to get money for my mom's medicine. She's in the hospital. I need to pay by Friday or they'll stop helping her." Her voice didn't crack, and she didn't ask for sympathy. She simply stated the truth as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Adam had heard countless pitches in his life, from CEOs, investors, lobbyists, but none had ever cut as deep or as fast as those words. He looked down at the paper cup and the few damp bills inside, then back at her face. There was something familiar in her eyes, something that pulled at a place in him he didn't even know still existed. Without fully knowing why, he reached into his coat, pulled out his wallet, and handed her a card instead of money. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she said quietly. "Lily Brooks." The moment he heard the last name, he froze. A name he hadn't thought about in years suddenly rushed back like a punch to the chest. He knew that name. And he knew there was no way this was a coincidence. Adam left the cafe with Lily walking beside him, her small hand clutched tightly around the business card he had just given her. He hadn't planned on offering anything more than help, but the name Brooks had awakened something inside him that refused to quiet. The night was still wet and cold, and Lily's thin jacket barely protected her from the wind. He instinctively took off his own coat and placed it gently over her shoulders. She blinked up at him, surprised, but said nothing. The city around them buzzed as usual, cars rushing past, people glued to their phones, but to Adam, it all felt muted, distant. He had 1,000 questions, but for now, he stayed silent. They took a cab to the address she gave him, a rundown apartment building in a neighborhood Adam hadn't been to in years. It wasn't dangerous, but it spoke of long days and hard choices. Lily guided him up 3 flights of creaky stairs and stopped at a door with chipped paint and a tarnished doorknob. She knocked gently. An elderly woman opened the door, her eyes cautious until she saw Lily, and then filled with relief. "You had me worried," she said, pulling the girl inside. Adam introduced himself, keeping his tone respectful. The woman's name was Mrs. Green, a retired schoolteacher who lived alone and had taken care of Lily temporarily. Sarah, Lily's mother, was in the hospital, and there was no one else. No father, no other relatives. Just this girl, her sick mother, and a kind neighbor trying to fill an impossible gap. Adam stood in the cramped living room, taking in the faded furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the side table, the drawings on the fridge that bore Lily's name. Everything felt suspended in time, like a place where survival had become a daily ritual. He asked if he could visit Sarah. Mrs. Green hesitated but eventually gave him the hospital name. She's in critical care. They're doing what they can, but the hospital keeps asking about payment. She doesn't have insurance anymore. The words were sharp, but not angry. Just tired. Adam left soon after, promising Lily he would check on her mother. She gave a quiet nod, as if unsure whether to believe him. He went straight to the hospital that night. The staff was reluctant to let him in without being listed as family, but his name, and influence, opened doors quickly. When he stepped into the dim hospital room and saw Sarah lying unconscious, pale, with tubes in her arms and oxygen in her nose, his breath caught. Her features hadn't changed much. She looked older, thinner, but still beautiful. And unmistakably the same Sarah Brooks he had once loved with everything he had. Seeing her like this, so vulnerable, so broken, shook him to his core. He sat by her bed, not saying a word, just staring at the rise and fall of her chest. Memories came rushing in, vivid and uninvited. College days, long walks, the laughter, the arguments, the moment she had said she couldn't follow him into his fast-paced world. He had walked away thinking it was the right thing, thinking ambition had to come first. Now, looking at her lying in silence, he realized just how wrong he'd been. And then another thought hit him like a wave. If Lily was 8 years old, then she had been born not long after their last goodbye. Which meant the unthinkable was possible. He stood up and walked out of the room, not to flee, but to find answers. He had money. He had access. But now, more than anything, he needed the truth. The next morning, Adam didn't go to the office. His calendar had been cleared in minutes by his assistant after he sent a single text, something he rarely did without warning. But nothing felt routine anymore. Not after seeing Sarah in that hospital bed, and not after meeting a girl who might be his daughter. Instead, he found himself sitting at the edge of his bed, staring at his phone, trying to decide what to do first. There were legal routes, ways to confirm parentage with quiet precision, and he had the resources to move things quickly. But this wasn't a business deal. This was personal. This was about a child, a woman he had once loved, and a mistake he hadn't even realized he'd made. He called a private lab and arranged a discreet DNA test. It would require a sample from Lily, and he knew she would need to trust him before he asked for something so invasive. He didn't want her to feel used or confused, not after she had already carried so much weight on her small shoulders. He contacted Mrs. Green again and asked if he could take Lily out for a few hours that afternoon, just a walk, some lunch, maybe a bookstore. The older woman hesitated, clearly protective, but eventually agreed when Lily said quietly, "It's okay. I want to go." They met near the apartment. Lily wore the same thin jacket, but this time with her hair pulled back in a braid. She looked more rested than the night before, but her eyes still held something watchful, guarded. Adam didn't push her to talk. They walked down a few streets, stopping at a quiet bakery where he ordered 2 hot chocolates and a sandwich for her. She ate slowly, carefully, as if saving each bite. He watched her more closely than he intended to, trying to find pieces of himself in her, her expressions, the way she spoke, the tilt of her head. And he saw it. Not just her blue eyes, but her mannerisms, her quiet strength. It felt terrifying and miraculous at once. After lunch, they walked to a small bookstore with a children's section in the back. She lit up when she saw a shelf of used chapter books. "I like reading," she said softly. "But sometimes the words are hard." He knelt beside her, picking up a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. "This one's a classic. You'll like it. It's about friendship and bravery." She smiled, and it felt like the first real moment of connection. When they sat down to read a few pages together, Adam noticed how her focus was steady, how her lips moved along with the words. She was smart, thoughtful. He felt an ache he couldn't quite describe. Pride. Regret. Hope. Later, back in the car, he gently asked her if he could take a cotton swab from her cheek, just to check something. He told her it was safe and painless and had nothing to do with her mom's treatment. She looked at him seriously and asked, "Are you a doctor?" He shook his head. "No, but I want to help your mom. And maybe you too." She nodded once, slowly, and let him do it without flinching. When it was done, she asked, "Do you think my mom will get better?" He paused, then said, "I'm doing everything I can to make sure she does." That night, as he dropped her off, Mrs. Green thanked him again. Lily turned before going inside and looked up at him. "Will you come back tomorrow?" He smiled, genuinely. "Yes. I promise." And he meant it. That evening, he sent the test sample off with a rush order and didn't sleep. He lay awake thinking about Sarah, about Lily, and about the life that might have existed if he hadn't walked away all those years ago. He didn't know what the test would say, but deep down, part of him already knew. The test results arrived 2 days later, sealed in an envelope that Adam didn't open right away. It sat on his desk while he stared out the window of his office, watching the people on the streets below who had no idea that his world was shifting with every passing second. He had always been a man of control, numbers, contracts, structure, but nothing in his life had prepared him for the possibility of having a child he didn't know existed. His hands trembled slightly as he finally tore the envelope open and read the result. There it was, printed in clinical clarity: the probability of paternity was greater than 99.9%. Lily was his daughter. He didn't cry. Not right away. The shock was too fresh, too deep. He sat in silence, letting the truth settle inside him like a storm he hadn't expected but somehow always knew was coming. There had been something in her eyes, in her calm resolve, that mirrored his own. And now it all made sense, the way she looked at the world, the way she protected herself with silence. She had his blood, his strength, and something he had lost over the years, innocence wrapped in quiet resilience. He thought of Sarah, lying in a hospital bed, still unaware that the man who had once left her was now sitting here, reading proof that they had created something lasting. He left the office without telling anyone where he was going and drove straight to the hospital. The nurse recognized him by now and let him through without question. Sarah was awake this time, propped up slightly with pillows, her skin still pale but her eyes alert. She looked surprised to see him again, but she didn't ask why he kept coming. He sat down beside her and took a moment before speaking. "I got the results," he said quietly. "She's mine." Sarah didn't react at first. She blinked, processing, then looked away toward the window. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to know," she whispered. "After everything." Adam leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell me?" She sighed, her voice trembling. "Because back then, you were already gone. You made your choice, and I thought bringing a child into your world would only make it worse, for you and for her. I didn't want her to feel like someone's burden. So I raised her myself." He could see the pain behind her words, not anger, just exhaustion and the kind of sadness that builds when you've had to be strong for too long. "You should have told me," he said, softer this time. "I deserved to know. But more than that, she deserved a father." Sarah looked back at him, and something in her expression shifted. She wasn't guarded anymore. She was tired, vulnerable, but open. "I know. And I've regretted it every time she asked why her daddy wasn't around." The honesty cut through him. He reached out and took her hand. "It's not too late." They sat like that for several minutes, not saying much, just existing in a space that once had been lost but was now quietly beginning again. Before he left, he promised Sarah that he would take care of everything, her treatment, Lily's education, their safety. She nodded but didn't thank him. She knew this wasn't charity. It was something he owed. And he knew it too. That night, he picked Lily up from school and took her to a quiet park near his apartment. She told him about her day, about the book she was reading, and then asked, "Did you find out?" He looked at her and said, "Yes. I did. And I'm never leaving again." Her face didn't light up immediately, but she nodded, holding the words carefully like they were something she wanted to believe in. He put his arm around her, and they sat on the bench watching the sun dip behind the buildings, a father and daughter beginning something neither of them had expected, but both so clearly needed. Adam's days began to change in quiet, irreversible ways. He started waking up before the sun, not to check emails or prepare for a shareholder call, but to drive across town and make sure Lily had breakfast before school. At first, she was hesitant about his presence, sitting stiffly as he poured her cereal or tied her shoelaces when Mrs. Green's arthritic hands couldn't manage. But slowly, something shifted. She began asking him questions about his job, about his childhood, and whether he had always been rich. He answered truthfully, sometimes awkwardly, admitting that he didn't grow up with much either, that he had been angry at the world once too. That seemed to matter to her. She started smiling more often, not the polite kind, but the soft, trusting kind that comes when a wall starts to lower. At the same time, Adam was navigating Sarah's recovery with unwavering attention. She had undergone a minor operation and was now in a rehabilitation wing, gaining strength little by little. They talked daily, at first about logistics, insurance, and medication, but those conversations grew longer, stretching into evenings. They began reminiscing, cautiously at first, then with less restraint. He confessed that after they had parted ways, he threw himself into building his empire not because he wanted to forget her, but because success was the only thing he could control. She admitted that she used to read articles about him in business magazines late at night, wondering whether he ever thought of her. There were no declarations of love, no rushed forgiveness, but something fragile was rebuilding between them, layered with time, loss, and now, with Lily at the center. One Friday afternoon, Adam picked Lily up from school and surprised her with a visit to a children's museum. Her delight was unfiltered as she ran from exhibit to exhibit, pulling him by the hand like they had done this 1,000 times. He didn't check his phone once. When she stopped at a wall where kids could pin up drawings of their families, she took a crayon and quietly sketched 3 stick figures. A tall man, a woman with long hair, and a little girl in between them. Above it, she wrote, "Home." Adam stared at it, his throat tight, knowing that the word meant something more than just a house. She didn't look at him, but she slipped her hand into his again. He didn't say a word. He just squeezed her fingers. Later that evening, Sarah called him from the hospital. Her voice was stronger now. She asked how Lily was doing, and he told her about the museum and the drawing. There was a long pause, then she said, "She's starting to believe this is real. That you'll stay." Adam leaned against the wall of his bedroom, staring out into the quiet night. "I will," he said. "I should have been there from the start, but I'm not going anywhere now." Sarah didn't reply right away. Then softly, she said, "I believe you." And with those 3 words, something old between them breathed again. That weekend, he invited Mrs. Green, Lily, and even Sarah's doctor to a small dinner at his place. It wasn't grand or formal, just pasta, fresh bread, and a chocolate cake Lily picked out at the store. Sarah joined by video call, and Lily placed the screen in the middle of the table like her mother was right there with them. They laughed, shared stories, and for a brief moment, it felt like a family in progress. Not perfect, not traditional, but real. That night, as Adam cleaned up the dishes with Lily drying beside him, he caught a glimpse of their reflection in the kitchen window. It was so ordinary, yet so profound. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man living above the world. He felt grounded, connected, and entirely human. He had missed out on years he could never reclaim, but he finally understood that showing up now, with consistency, honesty, and love, could be enough to rewrite everything that had been lost. As Sarah grew stronger and her release from the hospital neared, Adam felt a kind of nervous anticipation he hadn't expected. The past few weeks had been filled with quiet progress, Lily opening up more each day, Sarah recovering steadily, and his own routines becoming less about corporate power and more about presence. But with Sarah coming home, everything would change again. He wasn't sure if they would fall into something natural or if the years apart would create a distance too wide to bridge. Part of him feared she might choose to keep things the way they were, parallel lives with shared care of Lily, but nothing more. Still, he couldn't stop hoping for something deeper, something whole. On the day of her discharge, he arrived early at the hospital, carrying a small bouquet of her favorite flowers, white peonies, and a coat he had picked out for her himself. Sarah was sitting up, dressed and waiting, her hair tied loosely, her skin still pale but radiant with quiet strength. She smiled when she saw him, not wide, but warm enough to make his chest tighten. They didn't speak much during the drive. Lily was waiting at home, having drawn a big welcome sign in colorful markers, and Mrs. Green had baked a pie. When Sarah walked into the apartment and saw the handmade decorations, her eyes welled up. She knelt beside Lily and wrapped her arms around her daughter, and for a few minutes, nothing else in the world seemed to exist. That night, Adam gave them space. He stayed late at his office, not out of obligation, but out of respect. He knew that Sarah needed to feel at home again, in control of her own life after weeks of vulnerability. When he returned later to drop off some groceries, Sarah met him at the door. She looked at him closely and then stepped aside to let him in. They sat in the kitchen, alone for the first time in days, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound between them. Finally, she spoke. "I've been thinking a lot," she said. "About what all of this means. You being here. The way Lily looks at you now. She's starting to see you as her dad, not just someone who visits." Adam nodded, unsure where she was going. "And I want her to keep seeing you that way. You've done more for her in a few weeks than most people do in years." But, she hesitated, and he felt the breath catch in his chest. "I don't want to confuse her either. If we're doing this together, we need to do it right. Not just for her, also for us." He understood. This wasn't a test. It was a request for clarity, for honesty. He reached for her hand. "I want this to be real," he said. "Not out of guilt, not out of obligation. I want to build something with you. With her. I'm not the same person I was when I left. I wish I had known then what I know now." Sarah's eyes softened. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't pull her hand away either. Over the following days, they began adjusting to a new rhythm. Adam helped with dinners and bedtime stories, sat through school meetings, and even learned how to braid Lily's hair, badly at first, then better with practice. Sarah let him in gradually, no grand declarations, just quiet moments of trust, like when she leaned against him on the couch or reached for his hand in the grocery store without saying anything. Lily noticed, of course. Children always do. One night, she asked if they were going to be a family now. Adam looked at Sarah, then back at Lily, and said, "We already are." What surprised Adam most was how little he missed his old life. The power lunches, the jet setting, the endless pursuit of more, they all felt hollow now compared to sitting on the floor helping Lily build a puzzle or watching Sarah fall asleep beside him while they read. His world had gotten smaller, yes, but it had also gotten deeper, richer. And in that shrinking, he had found something far greater than he had ever built with steel and glass. By the end of that week, as they sat on the fire escape watching the sunset together, Lily resting between them, Sarah turned to him and said, "I never thought I'd feel safe again." Adam looked at her, not with promises but with presence. "You are," he said. And for the first time in a long time, it was true for all three of them. As autumn settled over the city, the leaves began to change, and so did everything around Adam, Sarah, and Lily. What once had been unfamiliar became routine. They had dinners together, took walks through Central Park, and spent lazy Sundays baking cookies in the small apartment kitchen, which was always too warm but filled with laughter. On the outside, everything looked almost normal, almost perfect, but beneath the surface, all three of them were still adjusting in different ways. Adam was doing his best to be present, to make up for the years he had missed, but sometimes he worried he was still a stranger stepping into a story that had already begun without him. Lily had come to accept him quickly, maybe too quickly. Children were like that, they could forgive with a simplicity adults had long lost. But Adam often caught her looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and quiet expectation, as though she was still deciding how far she could trust the reality in front of her. He never asked for her love, never forced their bond, but instead showed up every single day, steady and sure, letting her discover it in her own time. Sometimes that meant sitting through her favorite cartoon even though he didn't understand a word of it. Other times it meant showing up to her school play in a suit straight from a meeting, holding a bouquet of mismatched flowers she had mentioned liking weeks before. Every small gesture was a thread in the bridge he was quietly building toward her. Sarah, too, was navigating a fragile space. She was healing physically, but emotionally, she still carried old wounds, some from Adam, and others from years of being alone, of fighting every day just to give Lily a life that felt halfway whole. Trusting again wasn't easy, and sometimes she pulled back for no reason at all, retreating into herself with a look in her eyes that said she wasn't sure she could allow someone to carry the weight with her. But Adam didn't push. He learned to give her time. He learned to be silent when she needed silence, to listen when she finally chose to speak. They were learning each other all over again, and in that slow rediscovery, something stronger than romance began to grow. It wasn't just about love, it was about partnership, about rebuilding a sense of safety where it had once been shattered. Everything shifted the day a tabloid article came out with a photo of Adam leaving Lily's school. The headline was Ruthless, speculating about his secret family and asking questions neither he nor Sarah were ready to answer. The media didn't care about their privacy or pain, they cared about clicks. Sarah was furious. She didn't want Lily exposed, didn't want their quiet life turned into a spectacle. For a moment, Adam feared she might shut him out again, afraid of the damage his world could bring. But instead, she surprised him. "We protect her," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Together." Adam immediately called his legal team and released a short, carefully worded statement asking for privacy and clarifying that any stories involving his daughter would be legally challenged. He worked quietly behind the scenes to scrub the worst of it from the internet, using every ounce of his influence not for profit, but to shield the people who mattered most. Lily didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt the tension. That night, she asked Sarah if they were in trouble. Sarah pulled her close and said no, not anymore. For Adam, the incident became a turning point. He realized how easily the life he was trying to build could be shaken by the outside world. So he made changes. He delegated more, began pulling away from public appearances, and started laying the groundwork to eventually step back from his role as CEO. He didn't announce it. He just began shifting priorities, choosing school pickups over stockholder calls, choosing bedtime stories over late-night meetings. His colleagues didn't understand. His board protested. But Adam didn't care. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing power. He was choosing peace. And in the quiet that followed the chaos, something beautiful began to settle between them. They weren't perfect, not by any means. There were still misunderstandings, still moments of hesitation and fear. But now, they faced them together. They were no longer fragments of a life that could have been. They were becoming something real. A family. Winter came gently that year, as if the world itself was taking care not to disturb the fragile but growing life Adam, Sarah, and Lily had built together. Snow dusted the city sidewalks, and the windows of their apartment glowed with warmth. Inside, The space felt lived in the best way, cluttered with books Lily brought home from school, half-finished drawings taped to the fridge, and the scent of coffee and cinnamon from quiet Saturday mornings. Everything had changed, but none of it felt forced. They were simply existing together now, not in some grand fairy tale, but in something far more precious, reality, shared. Sarah had fully recovered, stronger now in more ways than just physically. She had found part-time work at a local community center, helping other single mothers navigate systems she once had to face alone. She came home tired, but fulfilled, and Adam always had dinner ready, or at the very least, Lily bouncing on her toes to tell her about her day. They laughed more easily now. Arguments were rare and usually ended in exhausted giggles, especially when Adam tried to cook something complicated and failed miserably. But those moments were part of the life they were learning to embrace, messy, imperfect, and deeply theirs. Lily had bloomed in this new world. Her teachers noticed it first, commenting on how her reading had improved, how she raised her hand more often, how she smiled without being prompted. She no longer carried the quiet burden of worrying alone. Her drawings were now filled with 3 figures instead of 2, always holding hands. She referred to Adam as, "my dad," without hesitation, and the first time she did it in front of him, he had to excuse himself to the hallway, blinking back tears he didn't want her to see. He still kept the drawing she gave him on his office desk, 3 stick figures and the words, "Thank you for finding me," written in bright orange crayon. As Christmas approached, Adam suggested something unexpected. They could move. Not away, but into something new, together. A home that was theirs from the start, not inherited or borrowed or patched together from past lives. Sarah hesitated at first. She had built her life around cautious steps, and something as permanent as a house with Adam felt enormous. But he didn't pressure her. Instead, he brought Lily to a cozy neighborhood where trees lined the streets and small cafes lit their windows with string lights, and let her pick the house she liked most. Of course, she chose the one with the blue shutters and the garden that looked like it had stories buried in the soil. When Sarah saw it, something shifted. It wasn't just a house. It was a future, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to walk into it without fear. They moved in just after the new year, slowly, carefully, 1 box at a time. And one evening, as the 3 of them sat on the floor eating pizza from the box, snow falling gently outside the big front window, Lily looked up and said, "This feels like forever." Adam wrapped his arm around her and looked at Sarah, who nodded silently, her eyes full of quiet joy. They didn't need anything more than that. No dramatic declarations. No perfect endings. Just the understanding that they had found each other again not by accident, but by choosing every day to stay. What was once broken had not only been healed, it had been transformed. They weren't who they used to be, and they didn't want to be. They had earned this peace. They had fought for this love. And now, in a small house with blue shutters and a garden waiting for spring, they had finally come home. This story's ending is powerful not because everything turns out perfectly, but because the characters earn their peace through vulnerability, growth, and forgiveness. What began as a tale of missed chances and hidden truths evolves into a deeply human journey of reconnection. Adam doesn't magically fix the past, and Sarah doesn't forget the pain, but together, they choose to move forward. That choice, quiet and deliberate, is what makes the ending so meaningful. Lily, the heart of the story, is not just a child rescued, she's the bridge between 2 people learning how to become a family. Her transformation, from singing in a cafe out of desperation to finding warmth and safety, mirrors the emotional arc of her parents. This is a love story, yes, but it's also a story about responsibility, redemption, and choosing love after loss. It leaves you not with a sense of fairy tale fantasy, but with hope grounded in real emotion, the kind that lingers after the final page.